The steady hum of the plane's engines wound down as Kellen Stroud stared out the small oval window. Asheville Regional Airport hadn't changed much in the 18 months he'd been away. Neither had the mountains that cradled it, steadfast, reliable, unchanging. Unlike him, he flexed the fingers of his prosthetic left hand. The metallic digits responded with mechanical precision, but the ghost of his missing flesh still burned sometimes. Phantom pain, the doctors called it. Kellen called it a reminder. The other passengers began to stand, stretching and grabbing bags from the overhead compartments. Kellen waited. Patience was the first lesson combat had taught him. Patience and awareness. He reached for his phone with his right hand, his real hand, and checked for messages. Nothing, despite the fact that he texted Marla 3 times since his layover in Atlanta. No response. Unusual for his wife, who typically kept her phone within arm's reach at all times for social media updates. "Sir, do you need assistance with your bag?" A flight attendant's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "No, thank you. I can manage." His voice was rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken much during the long journey home. With practiced movements, Kellen retrieved his rucksack and made his way off the plane. The terminal was busy with summer tourists and locals meeting loved ones. He scanned the crowd, looking for Marla's blonde hair, Jet's gangly teenage form, or Ava's pigtails. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. They probably got caught in traffic, he muttered to himself, ignoring the twinge of unease in his gut. That instinct, the one that had saved his life more times than he could count, was raising alarms. Kellen waited by the baggage claim for 30 minutes. His single duffel bag circled the carousel 3 times before he finally grabbed it. Another 45 minutes passed as he sat on a bench near the exit, watching families reunite. Business people hustle to taxes, and tourists excitedly plan their mountain adventures. No Marla, no kids, no texts, no calls. With a deep breath, Kellen walked to the information desk. "Excuse me, is there a bus into downtown Asheville?" "Yes, sir. One leaves in 15 minutes. Just outside door 3. The woman behind the counter smiled at him, her eyes flickering briefly to his prosthetic before returning to his face. Kellen nodded his thanks and headed outside. The mountain air hit him, cool and fresh despite the summer heat. After the dust and grit of his deployment, the scent of pine and wildflowers almost overwhelmed him. The bus ride into town gave him time to think. Maybe there had been a miscommunication about his arrival date. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe Marla's phone had died. Maybe. But as the bus wound its way through the familiar streets, Kellen knew better. 18 months was a long time. Long enough for things to change. For people to change. When he finally stepped off at the stop 3 blocks from his house, the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains had lengthened across the valley. He adjusted his rucksack and duffel bag, then began to walk home. The neighborhood looked the same. Tidy houses with well-kept yards, kids playing in sprinklers to beat the summer heat, neighbors chatting over fences, a slice of American life he'd fought to protect. The kind of peace that came at a price. His price had been his left hand and countless nights of interrupted sleep. Kellen's pace slowed as he rounded the corner to his street. Their house, a 2-story craftsman with a blue door Marla had insisted on, stood at the end of the block. His truck wasn't in the driveway. Instead, a sleek silver SUV he didn't recognize was parked where his vehicle should have been. As he approached the house, he noted other changes. New landscaping. A porch swing he'd never seen before. Decorative flags hanging by the entrance that read live, laugh, love. Standing at his own front door felt strange, like he was an intruder. He shifted his duffel to his prosthetic hand and reached for the doorbell with his right. Before he could press it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Kellen pulled out his phone. A text message from Marla lit up the screen. "Don't bother coming. We don't need a burden. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." Kellen read the words 3 times, each time hoping they might rearrange themselves into something else. Something that made sense. but they remained unchanged, cold and final. He stood motionless on the porch. The weight of his bags was suddenly insignificant compared to the weight in his chest. Through the decorative glass panels of the door, he could see movement inside his home. Shadows passing through what had once been his living room. His first instinct was to knock anyway, to demand answers face to face, to see his children. But the tactical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive in ambushes and firefights, took control. If this was a battle, he'd just been blindsided. Retreat, regroup, and return with a strategy. Never engage at a disadvantage. Kellen stepped back from the door. He set his duffel bag down, took out his phone, and typed a simple reply. As you wish. He picked up his bag and walked away from the house, not looking back. At the corner, he pulled out his phone again and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in months. Gideon. The phone rang 3 times before a raspy voice answered. This better be good. I'm billing you by the minute. Gideon. It's Kellen. A pause. Holy cow. You're back. When did you get in? Today. Just now. And you're calling me instead of making up for lost time with that wonderful wife of yours. I'm flattered, but... She changed the locks. Said it's over. The line went so quiet. Kellen thought the call had dropped. Then Gideon's voice came back, all traces of humor gone. Where are you? Corner of Maple and Pine. Walking away from my house. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. 20 minutes later, a battered Jeep Wrangler pulled up to the curb. Gideon Helper looked exactly as Kellen remembered him. Wild dark hair, perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a rumpled suit with the tie loosened, looking more like an off-duty detective than one of Asheville's most successful lawyers. Kellen tossed his bags in the back and climbed into the passenger seat. Jesus Christ, Gideon said, staring at Kellen's prosthetic hand. They didn't tell me it was that bad. It's not bad. It works. Gideon nodded once, accepting the statement at face value. He'd always been good at that, taking Kellen's sparse words and understanding what wasn't said. Your place or mine? Gideon asked as he pulled away from the curb. Yours. I don't have a place anymore. Like how you don't. Gideon's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. That's your house. Your name's on the deed. Apparently not enough to get through the front door. Gideon drove in silence for a few blocks, then asked, what exactly did she say? Kellen pulled out his phone and showed him the text. Dang, Gideon muttered, then handed the phone back. What do you want to do about it? I want my kids, my house, and my justice, Kellen said, his voice flat and controlled. Gideon glanced at him. In that order. In that order. Then we better start planning. Gideon's office occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. The space reflected its owner, chaotic at first glance, but organized in its own way. Law books lined the walls. Case files were stacked on every surface, and a large whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in notes and arrows connecting seemingly unrelated items. Kellen sat in a leather chair across from Gideon's cluttered desk, watching his friend pace. Let me get this straight, Gideon said, stopping to lean against the desk. No warning signs. No, we need to talk messages. No hints things were going south. She seemed normal in her emails. Asked about when I'd be home. Sent pictures of the kids. Kellen's jaw tightened. Jet got braces. Ava won a science award. And now suddenly they don't want you. Gideon shook his head. That's nonsense. Kids don't just stop wanting their father, unless their mother convinced them to. Gideon walked to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured 2 fingers in each, handed one to Kellen, then dropped into his desk chair. When's the last time you spoke to them directly? Not through Marla, but actually talked to your kids. Kellen fought back. 6 weeks ago. Video call. Ava showed me a drawing she made. Jet talked about baseball. He took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn down his throat. They seemed fine. 6 weeks is a lot of time for Marla to work on them. Gideon pulled a legal pad toward him and began making notes. What about your finances? Joint accounts. Everything's joint except my military pension. Gideon looked up sharply. She has access to everything else. Kellen nodded. That's the silver SUV in your driveway. New purchase. Never seen it before. Gideon made another note. We need to move fast. First thing tomorrow, we freeze all joint assets. Credit cards, bank accounts, investment accounts, all of it. Gideon's tone was urgent. She'll still have cash, Kellen said. Not as much as she thinks. Gideon's smile was cold. From what you've told me over the years, your wife has expensive tastes. That social media influencer gig of hers doesn't pay what she spends. Kellen leaned forward. I want to see my kids, and you will. But if we go in guns blazing, she'll be ready. We need to be strategic. Gideon set down his pen. You said you want justice. What does that look like to you? Kellen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I want her to understand what she's done. I want her to feel what I'm feeling right now. And then I want her gone from my life, except for where the kids are concerned. Gideon lit a cigarette, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating his face in the darkening office. She has no idea what she just triggered, he said, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. I need somewhere to stay, Kellen said. Somewhere off the grid, like a cabin in the mountains. It's remote. No one will look for you there. Gideon scribbled an address on a piece of paper. Keys are under the back porch step. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Gideon leaned back in his chair. We'll need to move fast. First, cut off the head, meaning financial decapitation. By this time tomorrow, Marla Stroud's credit cards will be declined, her accounts frozen, and her immediate future very, very uncertain. Gideon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Welcome home, soldier. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, accessible only by a winding dirt road that would become impassable in winter. For now, in late summer, it offered perfect isolation. Kellen stood on the small deck, watching the sun rise over the distant peaks. 3 days had passed since his return. 3 days of silence, planning, and meticulous preparation. Gideon had brought supplies, including a burner phone that couldn't be traced to Kellen. They'd implemented the first phase of their plan. Financial isolation. Now came the hard part. Waiting. Kellen's military training had taught him that patience was as powerful a weapon as any rifle. So he watched and he waited while Gideon became his eyes and ears in Asheville. The burner phone buzzed. Gideon, it's working, his friend said without preamble. Marla tried to use your joint credit card at that boutique she likes. Declined. Then tried another. Same result. You should have seen her face, like someone told her Christmas was canceled. The kids still at your house. Leona picked them up from summer programs yesterday. Marla was too busy dealing with the financial fallout. Kellen's jaw tightened. Leona Grafton had never liked him. The feeling was mutual. Any sign of who the SUV belongs to? Registered to a Cody Harrow, former fitness instructor at Marla's gym, currently unemployed from what I can gather. The name meant nothing to Kellen, but the implication was clear. How long has he been in the picture? A pause. According to my sources, about 4 months. 4 months. While Kellen had been dodging bullets and losing his hand, his wife had been building a new life with another man in his house, around his children. What's Marla saying about me? She's telling everyone you two separated before your deployment. That it was mutual. She's painting herself as the brave single mother who's doing it all while you abandon the family. Kellen's metal fingers curled into a fist. The prosthetic responded perfectly to the electrical signals from his muscles. If only his life could be repaired so effectively. And people believe her. Some do. Some don't. Small towns love gossip, but they also know you. Noah has been shutting down the worst of the rumors. Noah Weems, sheriff now, but once your platoon sergeant. A good man to have in your corner. What's next? Kellen asked. We let the financial pressure build. Meanwhile, I filed motions for an emergency custody hearing, claimed abandonment and unsafe living conditions. On what grounds? The boyfriend living in a house creates an unstable environment. Plus, I may have received an anonymous tip about questionable activities occurring around minor children. Is that true? It will be by the time I'm done. Gideon's voice held no remorse. How are you holding up? Kellen looked down at his prosthetic hand. I survived worse. That's not what I asked. I'm fine. No, you're not. But you will be. Gideon paused. Stay ghost, Kellen. Let me handle this part. Your time will come. After hanging up, Kellen sat on the deck, staring at the mountains. He thought of Jet and Ava. Were they wondering where he was? Did they believe he'd abandoned them? Or had Marla's poison already seeped too deep? He pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph. Ava at 7, gap-toothed and beaming, sitting on his shoulders, Jet beside them, trying to look tough but unable to hide his smile. Marla had taken the picture during a family hike before his last deployment. Before everything changed, Kellen tucked the photo away and went inside. In the small living room, he began his daily routine: push-ups, sit-ups, and the careful maintenance of his prosthetic. Physical discipline kept his mind clear. Clear minds made better decisions, and he would need to make perfect decisions to win this war. A week passed, then another. Gideon's reports came daily, painting a picture of Marla's crumbling facade. The joint accounts remained frozen. Marla's attempts to access emergency funds had been blocked at every turn. Her credit cards were useless plastic. The car lease payment had bounced, leading to the repossession of her beloved luxury sedan. The only vehicle left was Kellen's truck, which she'd hidden in a storage unit. Meanwhile, Cody Harrow's gym had closed due to unpaid rent. His income stream, whatever it had been, had dried up just as Marla's had. The lovers were trapped in a house they couldn't afford to maintain, with utilities threatening disconnection. She's trying to sell your stuff, Gideon reported during one call. Put your gun collection on some online marketplace. I had Noah confiscate it all. Claimed it needed to be held as evidence in a potential domestic dispute. Evidence of what? Nothing. But she doesn't know that. Kellen allowed himself a small smile. The kids. Jet's struggling in summer school. Teachers say he's withdrawn, angry. Iva's the opposite. Watching everything, saying nothing. She's like you in that way. Pride mingled with concern in Kellen's chest. Have you made contact with them? Not directly. Too risky. But I positioned myself where Ava would see me after her summer program. Made sure she knew I was looking out for them. Good. Kellen stood, restless. What about Marla's influencer business? Falling apart. She missed deliverables for 3 sponsors. They've cut ties. Her followers are dropping. People sense something's off. The perfect life she projected is showing cracks. And Cody? Getting desperate. Tried to pawn some of your things. Electronics. Watches. The pawn shop owner recognized your stuff and called Noah. What's Noah saying about all this? Nothing directly. But he's watching, waiting like you taught him. Kellen nodded, though Gideon couldn't see him. I need to see Noah. You sure that's wise? Staying ghost has been working. I'm sure. Set it up. That evening, Kellen drove the old pickup truck Gideon had loaned him to a fishing spot 20 miles outside of town. The sun was setting over the water when another vehicle pulled up. A sheriff's department SUV with tinted windows. Noah Weems stepped out, still in uniform. His hair had more gray than Kellen remembered, but he stood tall, posture straight from years of military discipline. The two men regarded each other silently before Noah extended his hand. Welcome home, Sergeant. Kellen shook it with his right hand. Sheriff now, I hear. Suits you. Noah's eyes dropped to Kellen's prosthetic. That's a heck of a souvenir. Better than the alternative. Noah nodded, understanding completely. They walked to the edge of the water, standing side by side, as they had on countless night watches in Afghanistan. "Your wife's been busy in your absence," Noah said. "So I've heard. She filed a missing persons report on you. Claimed she was worried." Kellen raised an eyebrow. "And I told her I'd look into it. That was the extent of my investigation." Noah picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "She's scared, Kellen. Running out of options." "Good. She'll try to leave with the kids soon. It's the logical next step." Kellen turned to face his old sergeant. "If she tries to leave the state with them, you stop her." Noah didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." He paused, then asked, "And if she lies in court?" "I'll bury her in truth." They stood in silence for a while longer, watching the last light fade from the sky. No more words were needed. Noah would do his part as he always had. Before they parted, Noah handed Kellen a small flash drive. "Security footage from your neighborhood. Last 4 months. Thought you might find it educational." Kellen pocketed it without comment. "The town's with you, Kellen," Noah said as he climbed back into his vehicle. "More than she knows." That night, back at the cabin, Kellen plugged the flash drive into the laptop Gideon had provided. Hours of surveillance footage from various security cameras in his neighborhood played out before him. Carefully, he documented each instance of Cody's arrival and departure from his home. The man's familiarity with Kellen's property, his comfort in Kellen's space, told a story of long-standing intimacy, more disturbing with glimpses of his children. Jet, sullen and withdrawn, barely acknowledging the man who had taken his father's place. Ava, watchful and wary, keeping her distance. In one clip, Cody grabbed Jet's arm during what appeared to be an argument. The boy wrenched away, face contorted in anger or pain. Kellen's metal fingers dug into the wooden desk, leaving marks. The burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. Kellen hesitated, then answered. "Dad." Ava's voice, small and cautious, hit him like a physical impact. "Ava, how did you get this number?" "Mr. Halper gave it to me. Said it was for emergencies." A pause. "Is this an emergency?" Kellen closed his eyes, steadying himself. "That depends. Are you okay?" "Mom lied. She said you didn't want to see us anymore. That you were staying away on purpose." "That's not true, Ava." "I know." Her voice grew stronger. "Jet's scared. He won't say it, but he is. Cody yells at him a lot." Kellen's jaw tightened. "Has he hurt either of you?" "No, not really. He grabbed Jet once. Left a bruise. Said it was an accident." "Where's your mother now?" "Downstairs with Cody. They're fighting about money. They fight a lot." A small, shaky breath. "I miss you." Those 3 words nearly broke his carefully constructed control. "I miss you too, honey. When are you coming home?" "Soon." Kellen opened his eyes, his focus sharpening. "I need you to be strong for a little longer." "Can you do that for me?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Jet needs you to come back." "I will. I promise." Kellen paused. "Ava, I need you to delete this call from the phone you're using." "Can you do that?" "Already did." "I'm not stupid, Dad." "Despite everything," Kellen smiled. "No, you're not. You're incredibly smart. Now listen, I can't call you. But if you need me, you text this number. Just 1 word. Now. I'll understand." "Okay." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications Ava couldn't fully understand. "I don't know yet," Kellen answered honestly. "But no matter what happens between me and your mother, nothing changes how I feel about you and Jet. Nothing. Promise. Promise." After the call ended, Kellen sat motionless, processing. Then he reached for a notebook and began writing. Not a letter, but a video script. Words for his children that needed to be said, even if he couldn't say them in person yet. The next morning, he drove to a spot with cellular reception. and called Gideon. "I need you to record something and get it to Ava. School mail, not home." "What kind of something?" "A message for both kids." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You sure about this? It could tip our hand." "I'm sure. They need to hear from me directly, not through Marla's filter." Later that day, in Gideon's office, Kellen sat before the camera. He wore a simple button-down shirt, his prosthetic hand visible but not emphasized. He spoke directly, honestly, about sacrifice and loyalty, about how some battles were fought with weapons, while others were fought with patience and truth. "I did not abandon you," he said, looking straight into the lens. "I will never abandon you. Right now, things are complicated between your mother and me, but my feelings for you both have never changed, and they never will." He explained in terms they could understand about the legal proceedings to come, how they might hear things that confused or upset them, how adults sometimes made mistakes that hurt the people they loved. "Whatever happens," he finished, "know that I am fighting for you. Both of you, always." Gideon watched the recording with an unreadable expression. "That was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "More anger. Less." Gideon waved a hand, searching for the word. "Vulnerability. Anger won't bring my kids back to me. Truth will." Gideon nodded slowly. "I'll get this to Ava tomorrow. Disguise it as school correspondence. Make sure no one else sees it." "Of course." Gideon hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Marla's trying to liquidate your investments. She forged your signature on some documents." Kellen's expression didn't change. "Can she do that?" "She could try. Won't work. The freeze we put in place covers that too. But it shows she's getting desperate." "Good. Desperate people make mistakes. They also become unpredictable. Dangerous." Kellen's metal fingers flexed. "So do I." 2 days later, Ava texted a single word to Kellen's burner phone. "Thanks." He knew she'd received the video. Knew she'd shown it to Jet. It was enough for now, a thread connecting him to his children, while he and Gideon continued dismantling Marla's defenses. The financial pressure was working. According to Gideon's sources, Marla had begun selling her designer clothes and bags online. Cody had been seen at the local pawn shop again, this time with Marla's jewelry. The utilities of the house had been shut off for 48 hours before Marla managed to scrape together enough for a partial payment. But the real blow came from an unexpected quarter. "Leona Grafton paid me a visit," Gideon reported over the phone. "Seems Marla cut her off when the money got tight. Leona didn't appreciate that, especially after all she's done to help." "What does she want?" "Revenge. Pure and simple." She brought photos, texts, evidence of Marla and Cody's affair dating back 8 months. 8 months, while Kellen was still deployed, before the injury. "Can we use it?" "Already am. Leaked select items to a parenting rights advocacy group I work with. They have a popular blog. Ran a story this morning. Veteran returns to betrayal. How one mother's choices impact children's stability. Names. None specifically. But enough detail that everyone in town will know who it's about." Kellen nodded to himself. "What's the response been?" "Marla's social media is imploding. Her followers are jumping ship. The few sponsorships she had left are on the verge of dropping her." Gideon's satisfaction was evident even over the phone. "She's blaming Leona, of course, which is partially correct. Leona did leak the most damning photos after being cut out. And the kids. Ava's school counselor called me. Said she asked about what happens to kids in a divorce. The video got through to her. Jet." A pause. "Got in a fight at baseball practice. With Cody. Witnesses say Cody was criticizing his pitching form. Jet got his face. Jet pushed him. Hard." Pride warmed Kellen's chest. "Is he in trouble?" "No, I smoothed it over. But it's another crack in Marla's facade. The perfect replacement dad isn't so perfect after all." The next day brought news of the court date. In 2 weeks, Judge Corinne Mavies would hear their case for emergency custody. Known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for deception, she was exactly the judge they needed. "Time to come out of hiding," Gideon said. "We need to prepare you for court." Kellen packed his few belongings and left the cabin. The isolation had served its purpose, allowing him to strategize without emotion clouding his judgment. Now it was time to face the battlefield. He moved into Gideon's guest room, and they spent the next 10 days building their case. Financial records showing Marla's irresponsible spending, security footage of Cody's rough handling of Jet, testimony from neighbors about raised voices and disturbing patterns. All the while, Noah kept watch over Kellen's children, ensuring Marla couldn't flee with them. The night before the hearing, Kellen stood before the mirror in Gideon's guest bathroom. He cut his hair short, shaved his face clean. The suit Gideon had ordered fit perfectly, tailored to accommodate his prosthetic arm without hiding it. He looked like what he was: a soldier, a father, a man who had sacrificed for what mattered. "Ready for tomorrow?" Gideon asked from the doorway. "As ready as I'll ever be. You'll see them tomorrow. Marla's required to bring them." Kellen nodded, his expression unreadable. "One last thing," Gideon said. "The story about you is spreading. Veterans groups are rallying. People are starting to ask questions about why a war hero is being kept from his kids. I don't want to be a cause." "Too late. You already are." Gideon's expression softened slightly. "Get some sleep, Kellen. Tomorrow we start taking back what's yours." The courthouse steps were crowded with journalists and curious onlookers. Word had spread about the case, the wounded veteran fighting for his children against the wife who had betrayed him while he served overseas. It made for compelling local news. Kellen moved through the crowd with Gideon at his side, ignoring the questions shouted at him. The cameras pointed in his direction. His focus was singular. His children were inside. The courtroom fell silent as he entered. He scanned the room, finding Marla and her lawyer seated at one table. She wore a conservative dress, hair pulled back, the picture of dignified distress. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, then narrowed in calculation. Kellen continued to look around. There in the gallery behind Marla sat Ava and Jet, flanked by a court-appointed guardian. Ava's face lit up when she saw him. Jet's expression was more guarded, but his eyes never left his father. As Kellen and Gideon took their places at the opposite table, Judge Corinne Mavies entered. Everyone rose. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, took her seat and surveyed the room. "Given the sensitive nature of this case and the presence of minors, I'm ordering all journalists and non-essential personnel to leave the courtroom," she announced. "This is a family matter, not public entertainment." After the shuffling and murmuring subsided, Judge Mavies addressed the attorneys. "I've reviewed the filings from both sides. Mr. Halper claims abandonment and creation of an unsafe environment. Ms. Pearson claims Mr. Stroud is unstable due to PTSD and his physical disability. Let's get to the facts." She turned to Marla's attorney. "Ms. Pearson, you may begin." The lawyer, a polished woman in an expensive suit, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Marla Stroud has been effectively functioning as a single parent for nearly 2 years. Mr. Stroud's deployments and subsequent rehabilitation kept him absent from the family home and children's lives. During this time, Mrs. Stroud built a stable environment for Jet and Ava, supporting them financially and emotionally." Judge Mavies interrupted. "Mr. Stroud was deployed in service to his country, correct? And then hospitalized due to injuries sustained in that service." "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "Continue with facts, not spin, Ms. Pearson." The lawyer cleared her throat. "Mrs. Stroud contends that Mr. Stroud's combat experiences have left him unable to provide a stable home environment. His PTSD, combined with the challenges of his physical disability, make him ill-equipped to care for 2 active children." Kellen's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. "Furthermore," Ms. Pearson continued, Mr. Stroud abandoned his family upon returning to Asheville. When informed that his children were distressed by his condition, he chose to disappear rather than work through the transition period. "That's a lie," Kellen said, his voice low but clear. "Mr. Stroud," Judge Mavies warned, "you'll have your turn." Gideon placed a restraining hand on Kellen's arm, then stood. "Your Honor, before Ms. Pearson continues constructing this fictional narrative, we'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts several of her claims." Judge Mavies nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Halper." Gideon approached the bench with a tablet. "First, I'd like to submit text messages sent from Mrs. Stroud to Mr. Stroud upon his arrival in Asheville." The judge reviewed the messages, her expression hardening. "Mrs. Stroud," she said, looking directly at Marla, "did you send these messages to your husband when he returned from military service?" Marla shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, but in context. The context appears to be that you informed a combat veteran who had lost his hand in service that he was a burden and not wanted by his own children." Judge Mavies's voice was cold. "Is that accurate?" "I was trying to protect my children from trauma," Marla insisted. "Kellen's injuries are shocking. I wanted to prepare them properly by changing the locks and telling him not to come home." The judge shook her head. "Continue, Mr. Halper." "Next, I'd like to address the claim that Mr. Stroud abandoned his family. He did not disappear. He strategically withdrew to protect his children from a potential custody battle after being forcefully denied access to his own home. During this time, he maintained indirect contact with his children and began legal proceedings to secure their welfare." Gideon approached the bench again. "We have evidence that Mrs. Stroud has been involved in an extramarital relationship that began during Mr. Stroud's deployment, before his injury. This relationship has created an unstable environment for the Stroud children, particularly as the man in question, Mr. Cody Harrow, has exhibited concerning behavior toward Jet Stroud." Judge Mavies looked up sharply. "What kind of concerning behavior?" "With the court's permission, I'd like to play a video." The judge nodded, and a screen at the front of the courtroom lit up. Security footage showed Cody grabbing Jet during what appeared to be an argument, the boy pulling away with a grimace of pain. Kellen watched Marla's face as the video played. Her composure slipped, panic flashing in her eyes. "Where did you get that?" she hissed across the aisle. Gideon ignored her, focusing on the judge. "We have multiple instances of similar behavior documented. Additionally, since Mr. Stroud's return, Mrs. Stroud has made reckless financial decisions that have directly impacted the children's stability. Utilities have been shut off due to non-payment. Food insecurity has become an issue." "That's because he froze all our accounts," Marla interjected, unable to contain herself. "Mrs. Stroud," Judge Mavies warned, "you'll have your opportunity to respond." Gideon continued methodically, presenting evidence of Marla's spending habits before the accounts were frozen, her attempts to liquidate joint assets, and the deteriorating conditions in the home since Kellen's return. Throughout the presentation, Kellen remained still, his eyes occasionally finding his children in the gallery. Ava watched everything with solemn attention. Jet's expression had shifted from guarded to angry as the video of Cody played. Finally, Judge Mavies turned to Kellen. "Mr. Stroud, I'd like to hear directly from you." Kellen stood, straightening to his full height. The courtroom was silent as he walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, he faced the judge. "Mr. Stroud, how would you describe your relationship with your children before your deployment?" "Strong, stable. I coached Jet's baseball team, helped Ava with science projects. We hiked most weekends as a family. And during your deployment, I called when I could, sent letters, asked about school, friends, their activities. They seemed normal, happy. Were there any indications from Mrs. Stroud that she was unhappy in the marriage?" "No. She complained about me being away, but that was typical for deployments." "Did she ever suggest you shouldn't return home after your injury?" "She said she was counting the days until I was back." Judge Mavies nodded. "Mr. Stroud, Ms. Pearson has suggested you suffer from PTSD that makes you unsuitable for parenting. How do you respond? Kellen met the judge's gaze directly. I experienced trauma, as all combat veterans do. I received treatment during my rehabilitation. I continue to attend therapy sessions. My condition is managed and does not impact my ability to care for my children. And your injury? The judge gestured to his prosthetic hand. It's an adjustment, but not a disability. I can drive, cook, clean, work, do everything necessary to provide for my family. Judge Mabee studied him. Why did you leave when your wife told you not to come home? Why not fight for access immediately? I made a tactical decision. Kellen answered without hesitation. Fighting on the front porch would have traumatized my children. I needed to regroup and approach the situation strategically for their sake. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. One last question, Mr. Stroud. What do you want from these proceedings? Kellen never flinched. I want what's best for my children. If that means sole custody, joint custody, or supervised visitation, I'll accept whatever arrangement ensures their safety and stability. But I will not accept being kept from them because of injuries sustained serving my country. Judge Mabee nodded. Thank you, Mr. Stroud. You may step down. As Kellen returned to his seat, he caught Ava wiping tears from her cheeks. Jet sat straighter, chin raised slightly, a posture Kellen recognized from his own reflection. Marla took the stand next, delivering an emotional testimony about her struggles as a single mother during Kellen's deployments. She claimed the text messages were sent in a moment of panic, that she'd been overwhelmed by the prospect of caring for a husband recovering from injury alongside 2 children. I made a mistake, she said, wiping at carefully constructed tears. I was scared, but I never meant to keep the children from Kellen permanently. Judge Mabee remained unmoved. Yet you allowed another man to move into the family home, a man who has demonstrated aggressive behavior toward your son. Cody was just trying to help with discipline. Boys need a male influence. They had a father, the judge observed dryly. After Marla's testimony, the court-appointed guardian for the children gave her assessment, noting that both children expressed a desire to see their father and appeared distressed by the current living situation. Finally, Judge Mabee addressed the courtroom. I've heard enough for today. This is a complex situation requiring careful consideration. However, I can make some preliminary rulings. She fixed Marla with a stern gaze. Mrs. Stroud, effective immediately, Mr. Harrow is barred from the family residence and from contact with the Stroud children, pending further investigation. Marla gasped, but the judge continued. Additionally, Mr. Stroud will have temporary visitation rights, supervised initially by the court guardian, 3 times weekly. The family home and all joint assets will remain frozen until final disposition of this case. She turned to Kellen. Mr. Stroud, we're not done. But I'll say this. You're no burden. You're a soldier and a father. This court recognizes both roles. As the proceedings adjourned, Kellen stood, unsure of what came next. Then Eva broke away from the guardian and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. After a moment's hesitation, Jet followed, approaching more slowly, but eventually joining the embrace. Kellen dropped to one knee, his good arm around both children, his prosthetic hand resting lightly on Jet's shoulder. I missed you both, he said quietly. So much. Across the courtroom, Marla watched, her face a mask of calculation beneath the tears. The weeks following the initial hearing brought a fragile new rhythm to Kellen's life. 3 times a week, he met with Jet and Ava at a neutral location, usually a park or the family resource center, with the court guardian observing from a distance. At first, the children had been hesitant, especially Jet. Marla's influence lingered in their questions, their wariness. But with each visit, the walls came down. They played catch, helped Ava with her science project, listened to Jet's increasingly animated stories about baseball. By the third week, the guardian had stopped taking notes and started bringing a book to read during their visits. She reported to the court that the children were thriving in their father's presence. Meanwhile, the pressure on Marla continued to mount. Cody, barred from the house and facing possible assault charges related to his treatment of Jet, had begun to distance himself. Financial constraints forced Marla to find part-time work as a receptionist, a far cry from her previous life as an influencer. She's spiraling, Gideon reported during a strategy session in his office. Liana says she's been drinking heavily, making wild accusations about you, me, the judge, everyone. The kids, declining academically, emotionally disconnected at home, but they light up during visits with you. The guardian's reports are solid gold for our case. Kellen nodded, studying the case timeline Gideon had created on his whiteboard. When's the final hearing? 3 days from now. Judge Mavis is expected to rule on permanent custody arrangements. Gideon capped his marker. We're in good shape, Kellen. Better than good. She'll try something before then. Gideon raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Because I would. When you're losing on all fronts, you change the battlefield. Kellen stood, restless. Have Noah increase patrols near the house. Already done. And I've had a PI tracking Marla's movements. So far, nothing unusual. But Kellen's instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive in war zones, were firing warning signals. That night, he parked his borrowed truck a block from his house and watched. Nothing seemed amiss. Lights on in the living room. Marla's shadow passing behind curtains. Normal domestic scenes. Too normal, perhaps. The next morning, Ava called him. An unprecedented break in their communication protocol. Dad, her voice was small, frightened. Mom says we're going on a trip to see Grandma in South Carolina. Kellen's blood ran cold. Marla's mother lived just across the state line, close enough for a quick escape, far enough to complicate jurisdiction issues. He kept his voice calm for Ava's sake. When? Today after school. She says we need to pack right now. But Dad, I don't want to go. I'll miss our visit tomorrow. You won't miss it, Kellen promised. Everything will be fine. Ava, you're very brave for calling me. Mom will be mad if she finds out. Let me worry about that. You just go to school like normal. Can you do that for me? Yes. That's my girl. I love you, Ava. Love you too, Dad. Kellen hung up and immediately called Noah. She's running today, planning to take the kids to her mother's in South Carolina after school. Noah's response was immediate. I'll handle it. Where will you be? Wherever my kids are. The next few hours passed in intense preparation. Gideon filed emergency motions to prevent Marla from leaving the state with the children. Noah positioned deputies at strategic points along the most likely route to South Carolina. Kellen waited at the school, watching from across the street as the final bell rang and children streamed out. He spotted Marla's car, not his truck, but a sit-in he didn't recognize, pulling up to the curb. Minutes later, Jet and Ava emerged from the building. They climbed into the back seat, and the car pulled away. Kellen followed at a distance, careful to stay unnoticed. The car headed toward the interstate, the quickest route to South Carolina. As expected. What wasn't expected was the silver SUV that pulled in behind Marla's car. Cody, breaking the court order to maintain distance from the children. Kellen called Noah. They're on I-26 heading east. Cody's with them in a separate vehicle. We got roadblocks set up at the state line. They won't make it through. The procession continued for nearly an hour. Just as the Welcome to South Carolina sign came into view, flashing lights appeared ahead. Noah's deputies had created a checkpoint, stopping all eastbound traffic. Kellen watched as Marla's car slowed, then suddenly swerved onto the shoulder, attempting to bypass the roadblock. The maneuver failed. 2 patrol cars immediately moved to block her path. Kellen parked his truck and approached on foot as Noah confronted Marla, who had exited her vehicle and was gesturing wildly, screaming about harassment, and false accusations. Ava spotted him first. "Dad!" she cried, scrambling out of the car and running toward him. Jet followed more slowly, his expression a mix of relief and anxiety. Marla whirled at Ava's shout, her face contorting with rage when she saw Kellen. You did this. You turned them against me." Cody had parked his SUV behind Marla's car and was now approaching, despite the deputies ordering him to stay back. Kellen lifted Ava with his right arm, holding her close. Jet stood beside him, unconsciously mirroring his father's stance. "You had the chance to walk away," Kellen said, his voice carrying across the roadside scene. His eyes met Marla's, unflinching. "Now you crawl." "This is kidnapping," Marla shrieked. "They're my children." "No, ma'am," Noah said firmly. "You're in violation of a court order prohibiting you from leaving the state with the minors, and he," Noah pointed at Cody, "is in violation of a restraining order." "This is my family," Cody shouted, still advancing despite the deputy's warnings. "No," Kellen said, "it's not." What happened next occurred in fractions of seconds. Cody lunged toward Kellen and the children. Deputies moved to intercept him. Marla screamed obscenities, and through it all, Kellen remained perfectly still, one arm around Ava, the other, his prosthetic, extended slightly, protecting Jet. When the chaos subsided, Cody was in handcuffs, facing charges of violating a restraining order and resisting arrest. Marla sat in the back of a patrol car, mascara streaking her face as she glared through the window. Noah approached Kellen and the children. "You three okay?" Kellen looked down at Ava, then over at Jet. "We will be." "Dad," Jet spoke for the first time, his voice wavering slightly. "What happens now?" Kellen placed his prosthetic hand gently on his son's shoulder. "Now we go home. The real home. Together." The courtroom was packed for the final custody hearing. News of Marla's attempted flight with the children had spread through Asheville, drawing curious onlookers and supporters from the veterans community. Judge Mavis entered, her expression even more stern than during the first hearing. "Given recent events," she began, "this court has grave concerns about Mrs. Stroud's judgment and respect for legal process." Marla sat at the defendant's table, a new attorney beside her. Her previous lawyer had withdrawn from the case after the border incident. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back severely, attempting to project contrition. Kellen and Gideon sat at the opposite table, prepared and composed. Behind them, in the gallery, sat Ava and Jet with the court guardian. Noah occupied a seat near the door, uniform crisp, face impassive. The hearing began with Gideon presenting the events at the state line, backed by police reports and testimony from the deputies involved. Judge Mavis listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Marla's new attorney attempted damage control, claiming his client had merely planned a weekend visit with the children's grandmother and had informed family court of her intentions, a claim quickly disproven by court records. "Your Honor," Gideon said, "we have additional testimony relevant to Mrs. Stroud's pattern of behavior and dishonesty." Judge Mavis nodded. "Proceed." To everyone's surprise, Leona Grafton took the stand. Once Marla's closest friend and confidant, she now sat rigid with barely contained anger. "Mrs. Grafton," Gideon began, "how long have you known Marla Stroud?" 15 years, since college. "And during that time, would you consider yourself close to her?" "We were best friends. Until recently." "Can you describe the nature of your falling out?" Leona's eyes flicked to Marla, who was staring daggers at her. When Kellen returned and Marla's financial situation became strained, she expected me to continue supporting her lifestyle. Loans she'd never pay back, covering for her lies. When I refused, she cut me off. "Were you aware of Mrs. Stroud's relationship with Cody Harrow before Mr. Stroud's return?" "Yes. It began while Kellen was deployed, before his injury." "Did Mrs. Stroud express concern for her husband when she learned of his injury?" Leona hesitated, then said, "She was upset, not about his hand, but about how it would affect her image. She said, and I quote, "How am I supposed to post cute couple photos with a husband who has a robot hand?" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Kellen's expression didn't change, but his metal fingers curled slightly against the table. Did Mrs. Stroud ever express intentions regarding custody of the children? Yes. She said she would use Kellen's PTSD and injury against him. That no judge would give custody to a broken soldier over a mother. Marla's attorney objected, claiming hearsay, but Judge Mavis overruled. The witness is recounting direct conversations, not second-hand information. After Liana's damning testimony, several other witnesses took the stand. Teachers who had noticed changes in the children's behavior, neighbors who had overheard arguments between Marla and Cody, even the pawnshop owner who had recognized Kellen's possessions. Finally, Kellen himself was called to testify. He walked to the stand with measured steps, sat down, and faced the court with the same steady composure he'd maintained throughout the proceedings. "Mr. Stroud," Gideon began, "what are you seeking in terms of custody arrangements?" "Sole physical custody with structured visitation for their mother," Kellen answered without hesitation. "The children need stability, structure, consistency. And what can you provide that Mrs. Stroud cannot?" Kellen's gaze swept the courtroom, finding his children before returning to Gideon. Security, both emotional and financial. A home where they are the priority, not accessories to someone's public image. And most importantly, unconditional love, the kind that doesn't disappear when circumstances become inconvenient. "Mr. Stroud, how has your injury affected your ability to care for your children?" "It hasn't." Kellen raised his prosthetic hand. "This is an adaptation, not a limitation. I can still throw a baseball with my son, still braid my daughter's hair, still prepare meals, drive them to school, help with homework. The only thing I can't do is pretend to be something I'm not. And that's something I never want to teach my children anyway." Gideon nodded. "One final question. How do you feel about Mrs. Stroud now, after everything that's happened?" The courtroom fell silent, waiting for his answer. Kellen took a breath. "She abandoned me the moment I was no longer convenient. But she forgot one thing." His eyes met Marla's across the room. "I survive." Marla's testimony was brief and ineffective. Her attempted flight had destroyed any credibility she might have had. Her claims about Kellen's ability to parent were easily refuted by expert testimony from his rehabilitation team and the court guardian's observations. As the hearing neared its conclusion, Judge Mavis reviewed her notes, then looked up, surveying the courtroom. "Before I rule, I want to address a fundamental issue in this case. Military service and the sacrifices it entails, including physical injuries, should never be weaponized in custody disputes. To do so is not only legally unsound, but morally reprehensible." She turned her gaze to Marla. "Mrs. Stroud, your actions demonstrate a pattern of selfishness and deception that is deeply troubling to this court. Your attempted flight across state lines with the minor children shows a blatant disregard for legal process and their emotional well-being." Then to Kellen. "Mr. Stroud, your composure and focus on your children's needs throughout these proceedings speak to your character and capabilities as a parent." Judge Mavis straightened her papers. "It is the ruling of this court that legal and physical custody of Jet and Ava Stroud be granted to their father, Kellen Stroud. Mrs. Stroud will have supervised visitation, twice monthly, to be reevaluated after 6 months of demonstrated stability and compliance." She continued addressing additional points. "The family home will be returned to Kellen's exclusive possession. Marla will be responsible for paying alimony and court costs, and a formal investigation into Cody Harrow's interactions with Jet will proceed under the district attorney's supervision." As the gavel fell, finalizing the ruling, Kellen remained still, absorbing the reality that it was over. He'd won, not just custody, but vindication. Gideon clasped his shoulder. "It's done. You got everything we aimed for." Kellen nodded once, then stood to embrace his children as they rushed to him from the gallery. Across the courtroom, Marla sat alone, her face blank as the implications of the ruling sank in. Everything she had built, her image, her lifestyle, her narrative, had crumbled, and she had no one to blame but herself. Autumn painted the Blue Ridge Mountains in hues of fire, as Kellen settled into his reclaimed life. The house, once filled with Marla's carefully curated decor, now reflected a simpler, more practical aesthetic. Photos of the children covered the walls. Books filled the shelves. Evidence of actual living, rather than performances for social media. Marla had moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Her influencer career had collapsed entirely after the court case made local headlines. The few sponsorships she'd managed to maintain had dropped her, unwilling to associate with someone who had abandoned a wounded veteran. Cody had left town altogether, facing potential charges related to his treatment of Jet and the restraining order violation. Last Kellen heard, he'd moved to Florida, as far from Asheville as he could reasonably get. Gideon stopped by regularly, often bringing case files to work on while the children did homework at the dining table. One evening, as they sat on the back deck watching the sunset, he made an unexpected suggestion. "You should consider public speaking," he said, sipping a beer. "The veterans groups that supported you during the trial, they're looking for voices like yours. Authentic, uncompromising." Kellen shook his head. "I'm not interested in being a poster boy. Not a poster boy. A voice for other vets facing similar situations. PTSD, injuries, readjustment issues, family challenges." Gideon glanced at Kellen's prosthetic. "You've got a powerful story. My story isn't finished yet. No one's is. That's the point." Kellen considered it briefly, then shook his head again. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm focused on them." He nodded toward the house where Jet and Ava were visible through the kitchen window, washing dishes together. "Fair enough." Gideon finished his beer. "By the way, Marla made her first supervised visitation request. For next weekend." "What did you tell her?" "That the timing is problematic. Jet has a baseball tournament. Ava has a science competition. Both events you're committed to attending." Kellen nodded. "She'll have to reschedule. She won't like it." "I don't care what she likes." Gideon studied his friend for a moment. "You're never going to forgive her, are you? Not even for the kid's sake." Kellen turned, meeting Gideon's gaze directly. "The kids need to understand that actions have consequences, that loyalty matters, that some betrayals can't be undone with an apology or passage of time. That's a hard lesson. Life is hard. Better they learn from me than from someone who doesn't love them." Later that evening, after Gideon had left, Kellen sat at his desk, staring at a blank document on his laptop screen. He'd been thinking about Gideon's suggestion. Not the public speaking, but the idea of sharing his story. Not as a performance or a plea for sympathy, but as a record, a testament. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to type. Title: "As You Wish," the phrase Marla had once used to dismiss him. The words he had turned into a promise, to himself, to his children, to the future he was now reclaiming. He typed the first paragraph, then paused as a soft knock sounded at his office door. "Dad." Jet stood in the doorway, holding a notebook. "Got a minute?" "Always." Jet approached hesitantly, then thrust the notebook forward. "I wrote something for English class, but also for you." Kellen took the notebook, opening it to a page marked with a folded corner. Inside, in Jet's careful handwriting, was a letter. "Dear Dad, I never stopped believing you'd come back. I'm proud to be your son." Simple words, powerful beyond measure. Kellen looked up at his son, no longer the boy in the photograph he carried during deployment, but a young man growing into his own strength, and for the first time since his return to Asheville, Kellen Stroud smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means everything." Jet nodded, understanding in his gaze. "What are you writing?" "A book, I think. Our story. Can I read it when it's ready?" Kellen set the notebook carefully on his desk. Some parts might be hard to read. I can handle it, Jet said, straightening his shoulders in unconscious imitation of his father. I'm stronger than I look. I know you are. Kellen reached out, clasping his son's shoulder with his prosthetic hand. You get that from both of us. The moment hung between them, fragile, profound, before Jet nodded again and left the room. Kellen returned to his laptop, fingers moving with new purpose across the keys. The story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to all of them. Their loss, their fight, their recovery. He would write it not for vengeance but for truth. And truth, Kellen had learned, was the most powerful weapon of all. The weekend dawned clear and cold, perfect hiking weather. Kellen packed a small backpack with water bottles, energy bars, and a first aid kit, habits from his military days that served him well as a father. Do we have to go all the way to the top? Ava asked, struggling with her shoelaces. Not if you don't want to, Kellen answered, kneeling to help her. But the view was worth it. Jet appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in hiking boots and a light jacket. I've been researching this trail. There's a waterfall halfway up, and the summit has views of 3 states. That's right. Kellen smiled at his son's enthusiasm. In the months since the custody ruling, Jet had blossomed, rejoining the baseball team, improving his grades, rebuilding friendships that had suffered during the turmoil. Ava, too, had changed. Her quiet watchfulness remained, but now it was balanced with bursts of exuberance and curiosity. She'd won the science competition with a project on prosthetic technologies, inspired by her father. The drive to the trailhead took them through Asheville's downtown, past familiar landmarks and a few new developments. As they passed the courthouse, Ava grew quiet, staring out the window. Dad, she asked finally, is Mom coming to my birthday next week? Kellen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She asked, too. It's up to you. What if I don't want her to? Then she won't come. Ava considered this. What if I do want her to, but only for a little while? Then that's what will happen. Kellen's voice was gentle but firm. Your feelings matter, Ava. Always. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. The trailhead parking lot was nearly empty, benefits of starting early on a Sunday morning. Kellen distributed small backpacks to each child, insisting they carry their own water and snacks. Self-reliance was one of the many lessons he was teaching them, one hike at a time. The trail began gently enough, winding through pine forest thick with morning mist. Jet took the lead, occasionally pointing out interesting rocks or plants. Ava stayed closer to Kellen, sometimes slipping her small hand into his as they navigated steeper sections. They'd reached the waterfall by mid-morning. Kellen spread a small blanket on a flat rock, and they sat eating apples and trail mix while listening to the thundering cascade. Dad, Jet asked between bites, is it weird that I don't miss him? Cody. Jet nodded. No, it's not weird. Mom says I should. Says he cared about me. Kellen chose his words carefully. People show care in different ways. Some ways are healthy. Some aren't. He grabbed me. Hard. Jet rubbed his arm unconsciously. Said I needed to toughen up. You're plenty tough, Kellen said. But there's a difference between toughness and cruelty. Between discipline and intimidation. Like in the army. You had discipline, but your sergeants weren't cruel, right? The good ones weren't. Kellen smiled at the parallel his son had drawn. The best leaders build you up. They don't tear you down. Jet seemed to absorb this, nodding slowly. I think I understand. After their rest, they continued upward. The trail grew steeper, switchbacking up the mountainside. Ava tired first, requiring frequent breaks. Kellen carried her on his shoulders for one particularly challenging stretch, her small hands resting on his head for balance. By early afternoon, they'd reached the summit, a rocky outcropping that offered panoramic views of the surrounding mountains. The autumn colors spread below them like a patchwork quilt, red and gold, and orange stretching to the horizon. Wow! Ava breathed, turning in a slow circle. It's like being in an airplane. Better, Jet corrected. You can feel the wind up here, smell the trees. Kellen set up their lunch on a flat boulder, sandwiches, fruit, and chocolate as a reward for the climb. As they ate, he pointed out landmarks, the silver ribbon of the French Broad River, the cluster of buildings that was downtown Asheville, the distant peaks along the Blue Ridge Parkway. Can we see our house from here? Ava asked. Not quite, Kellen answered. But we can see our town, our home, our home. She repeated, testing the words. Then, with the directness of a child, will Mom ever be part of our life again? Jet looked up sharply, clearly interested in the answer despite his pretense of studying the distant mountain range. Kellen set down his sandwich. He'd known this question would come eventually, had prepared for it. But the reality of answering it here, now, with both children watching him intently, felt momentous. Your mother will always be your mother, he said finally. Nothing changes that. Not divorce, not distance, not time. That connection is permanent. He paused, meeting each child's gaze. But as for being part of our daily life, our home, our routines, our future, that's different. She chose her side. We build ours now. Without her, Jet clarified. Without her, Kellen confirmed. But that doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with her. On your terms, when you're ready. Ava leaned against him, seeking comfort. I'm still mad at her sometimes. For the lies. That's natural. Anger takes time to process. Kellen put his arm around her shoulders. Just remember, being angry at someone doesn't mean you can't also love them. Do you still love her? Jet asked suddenly. The question hit harder than Kellen had expected. He looked out over the mountains, considering his answer carefully. I loved who I thought she was, he said finally. But that person didn't exist. So no, I don't love her now. I respect her as your mother. I'll be civil for your sakes. But love requires trust. And that's gone. The children absorbed this in silence. Then Jet nodded, as if confirming something to himself, and returned to his lunch. As the sun began its westward descent, they packed up their belongings and prepared for the hike down. Standing at the edge of the summit, the three Strouds looked out over Asheville one last time. Kellen stood tall against the setting sun, one hand metal, the other holding his children's. No forgiveness, no weakness, just truth, scars, and a future, one not given. Ready? He asked. Ready, his children answered in unison. Together, they turned and began the journey home.